In late November 2020, a wave of illness began escalating seriously across Taiwan. At the time, anyone who could stay home tried their best to do so, minimizing any unnecessary trips outside. Against this backdrop of a society turned inward, with everyone isolating behind closed doors and limiting contact with the outside world, the duty room at the Jinping police station in Taiping District, Taichung City, had been quieter than usual those days. But that stillness was suddenly shattered when a middle-aged woman burst through the door in a panic. Her surname was Liu, and from the very first words she spoke, her voice trembled uncontrollably. Her daughter, a woman named Yurong, who lived in the Wengsin residential community in Beitan District, Taichung City, had been completely unreachable since the evening of November 29th. In truth, Mrs. Liu wasn't the type of mother prone to excessive worry, the kind who panics at the slightest disturbance. Over the past 6 months, since the outbreak began spreading, the mother and daughter had gradually adjusted to a new rhythm of life. Fewer face-to-face visits, but more frequent phone calls to check in and chat. It was how they adapted to the circumstances, maintaining their bond without having to risk traveling during such a tense period. But this time was completely different. Abnormally so, to the point where she couldn't sit still. Just the night before, the two had spoken on the phone like any other time. During that conversation, Yurong had clearly promised that on the evening of November 29th, she would bring her 2 young daughters to Taiping to visit their grandmother. She had even mentioned that she'd just finalized her divorce paperwork and planned to discuss the children's future care arrangements with her mother when they met. Her voice had sounded normal at the time, nothing unusual, no hint of anything amiss. Yet the result was that she never showed up as promised. Yurong's phone had gone completely dead from that evening onward. No matter how many times her mother called, she received only terrifying silence from the other end. Yurong was born in 1983, making her exactly 37 years old in 2020. She had graduated from the Japanese language department at National Chengchi University and subsequently pursued a career as a Japanese translator. Her daily life was remarkably simple and routine. Work in the morning, pick up her 2 daughters from school in the afternoon, then spend time with her small family. She had no complicated social relationships, didn't participate in parties or entertainment, and certainly had no nightlife habits. She was a woman who lived a quiet, orderly life, devoted entirely to her children. Mrs. Liu emphasized repeatedly to the police that her daughter, no matter how troubled her marriage might have been or how badly it had fallen apart, would absolutely never leave without a word, abandoning her 2 small children to simply vanish like this. If something was wrong, if she felt suffocated and needed space, at most she would say, "I want to go for a walk to clear my head." But she would never completely cut off contact. Not a single message, not a single call. Especially during such a stressful and sensitive period right after finalizing a divorce. When emotions were still unsettled and there was so much to sort out, there was no way she wouldn't let her family know she was safe. No way she would leave her elderly mother worried sick like this. That evening, a little after 8 p.m., Deputy Squad Leader Lin from Jinping Police Station personally accompanied Mrs. Liu to the Wengsin community in Beitan District. As the car approached the building, Mrs. Liu immediately recognized the familiar motorcycle parked by the roadside, and her eyes instantly reddened. The bike was parked neatly, the front wheel locked, its body covered in dust, clearly untouched since at least after November 29th. For the investigators, this indicated that Yurong had indeed returned home that evening. They followed the building manager upstairs and rang the doorbell. Footsteps echoed from inside. The door was opened by Yurong's ex-husband, Shina Kai. Inside, the lights were on, the TV was playing, and 2 young daughters were chatting and playing in their room. Yet the moment Deputy Squad Leader Lin stepped inside the apartment, he quickly noticed several things that weren't right. Details an ordinary person might easily overlook, but which immediately caught the attention of an experienced detective like himself. At first glance, the living room wasn't messy at all. Everything was arranged relatively neatly. In the kitchen, dishes were organized normally, just like any other day. Most importantly, there were no signs whatsoever of any scuffle or fight having taken place. But when he entered the master bedroom, what he saw made him even more uneasy. The handbag Yurong used daily was sitting quietly in a corner of the room. Her cell phone was tucked neatly in a drawer. Her ID card, bank cards, cash, everything was arranged perfectly inside, nothing missing. All her essential personal belongings were there, yet paradoxically, it was clear that no one had touched them in quite some time. For experienced criminal investigators, this excessive neatness, this uncanny orderliness, was actually more chilling than a scene with belongings scattered everywhere. By normal logic, even if someone had a heated argument and angrily slammed the door on their way out, they would still typically take their cell phone with them and have at least some cash in their pocket. That's practically anyone's natural reflex when leaving home. Moreover, Yurong was a freelance translator whose daily work required her to constantly receive calls from clients, to always be connected, and she also had to pick up her 2 daughters from school every afternoon. How could someone with such a schedule and responsibilities leave home empty-handed, not even taking her phone? Mrs. Liu stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, her eyes fixed on that familiar handbag and the phone lying silent in the drawer. Her legs suddenly felt like they might give out beneath her, her whole body trembling so badly she could barely stand. As a mother, she understood her daughter's daily habits all too well. Yurong was careful to the point of being methodical. Even if she was just going downstairs to take out the trash and would be right back, she would still grab her phone out of habit. Yet now, all her personal belongings remained exactly where they should be. Nothing missing, but the person herself had vanished without a trace. The feeling in her heart was no longer simple anxiety or worry like before. It had gradually transformed into genuine fear. For the moment, Deputy Squad Leader Lin could only gently comfort Mrs. Liu with a few words to calm her down. Simultaneously, he immediately contacted the building management to request all footage from the residential complex's surveillance camera system. From the main lobby on the first floor, to inside the elevators, to the basement parking area, to the motorcycle entrance and exit, to the main gate of the entire complex, any angle that could be retrieved, he requested it all, leaving no location unchecked. Then the entire team sat down patiently, reviewing frame by frame, tracing backward through time to search for any possible clue. Finally, after hours of meticulous review, they found the last image of Yurong captured by the cameras, time-stamped precisely at 5:46 p.m. on November 29th. In the extracted video footage, Yurong's image appeared clearly through the camera lens. She was still wearing her work clothes like any other day, her familiar handbag on her shoulder. She stepped out of the elevator looking perfectly normal, head slightly bowed, eyes on the phone screen in her hand, perhaps checking messages or reading something. She casually adjusted the bag strap on her shoulder, then walked leisurely toward her apartment on the 5th floor. Her silhouette gradually receded deeper into the dim hallway, then quickly disappeared completely at the edge of the frame as she rounded a corner beyond the camera's reach. From that moment onward, until late into the night of November 30th, the investigators on the case sat patiently, reviewing over and over again, countless times, all the recorded footage from every camera in the building. They scrutinized frame by frame the elevator cameras, the basement vehicle area cameras, the entrance and exit cameras for the entire complex. Even footage from the stairwells, locations few people used and which might have accidentally captured someone passing by. They didn't skip over, checking every smallest detail carefully. Yet all those efforts proved futile. Yurong's figure never appeared again. However, there was another detail that concerned Deputy Squad Leader Lin even more. The night before Mrs. Liu rushed to the police station to file her report, this apartment had actually already attracted attention once before. Around 6 p.m. on November 29th, just about 10 minutes after the camera recorded Yurong entering the hallway, a resident surnamed Lin, living on the 4th floor of the same building, had proactively called the local police station to report a suspicious situation. According to his account, from the neighbor's apartment on the floor above, the very apartment where Yurong lived, extremely violent arguing had suddenly erupted. Even more alarming, he had heard a woman's voice screaming, "Help me!" The cries for help broken and choked as if she were being restrained by someone. Unable to ignore such frightening sounds, he and the building manager had rushed upstairs, stood before the apartment door, and knocked repeatedly. But no one came to answer. Nevertheless, through the narrow gap under the door, they could still see the living room lights were on, clear evidence that someone was inside. Subsequently, patrol officers were dispatched to the scene to investigate. They stood outside the door, calling out several times, asking if anyone was inside, but no one responded. Facing this situation, the patrol officers found themselves in a difficult position. They worried that if they forced their way in, and it turned out to be just an ordinary domestic dispute, they would face legal complications and accusations of violating the family's privacy. In the end, they decided to handle it lightly, treating it as just a routine family conflict, and left without investigating further. It wasn't until this moment, as all the pieces of information began to be laid out side by side on the work table, that Deputy Squad Leader Lin suddenly recognized the terrifying connection between these two seemingly separate incidents. That very evening, Deputy Squad Leader Lin took the opportunity to ask Mr. Zhang, the building manager, about his impressions of this family. Mr. Zhang sighed and slowly recounted what he knew. He said he'd been working as the building manager here for many years now, and by nature he didn't like getting involved in residents' private affairs. But over the past 2 years, the apartment belonging to the couple Yurong and Shina Kai had become an unwilling center of attention for the entire floor, even the neighboring floors. The two argued so frequently that all the surrounding neighbors knew about it and had grown accustomed to hearing it. Each argument was extremely loud, and the number of incidents was countless. The content of these disputes, from what could be heard through the door, mostly revolved around money, who the apartment belonged to, and issues with raising their 2 young daughters. Mr. Zhang also recalled that for quite a long period before, he had rarely seen Shina Kai around the building, as if he had moved elsewhere. But in recent months he had started coming and going from the apartment frequently again, appearing regularly. And accompanying his return were continued arguments. Sometimes Mr. Zhang would walk past and hear them arguing intensely behind the closed door about visitation rights after the divorce. As for when exactly the two had officially filed for divorce, Mr. Zhang said he didn't know. No one had informed the building management about it. He only knew one thing. From everything he'd seen and heard over this time, the relationship between these two people had probably reached its breaking point. As soon as he returned to the precinct, Deputy Squad Leader Lin immediately sat down at his desk and began searching the household registration system to verify information about the couple's marital status. The results on the computer screen confirmed that Yurong and Shina Kai had officially registered their divorce exactly 5 days before the incident occurred, specifically on November 24, 2020. This meant that on the fateful evening when Yurong vanished without a trace, legally and officially, the two were no longer husband and wife. Yet despite being divorced, they were still living together under the same roof. The two had divorced less than a week ago. Both children were at home when the incident occurred. The man, despite no longer being her husband, continued living in an apartment that was entirely under the woman's name. Meanwhile, that very woman was captured on camera entering the building on the afternoon of November 29th, but from then on there was no footage whatsoever showing her leaving. Her cell phone and handbag had both been left neatly inside the home. And most notably, the report called in by the downstairs neighbor that same day had mentioned one detail that couldn't be ignored: a woman's desperate cries for help. When all these elements were pieced together, the full picture gradually came into focus. In Deputy Squad Leader Lin's mind, it was now crystal clear. What was unfolding before him could no longer be explained simply with the dismissive phrase, "She got upset and left home." It felt more like he was standing before a mysterious black hole locked tight, hidden behind that apartment door. A woman who had vanished without leaving a single trace. Yet he also understood that a detective's intuition, no matter how sharp, couldn't be presented as evidence in court. What the task force needed to do next was be patient and meticulous, peeling back layer after layer from this seemingly quiet building, excavating each buried piece of truth. And the first person they needed to confront was obviously none other than the last known person to have been near Yurong in that apartment, the ex-husband who had divorced her less than a week prior, Shina Kai. The police decided not to show their hand immediately, not to rush into confrontation, or apply pressure from the start. Instead, they took a softer approach, inviting Shin Kai to the police station under the gentle pretense of understanding the situation and assisting with the investigation, asking him to recount everything that had happened over the past few days, from beginning to end, in as much detail as possible. Shin Kai's statement sounded fairly straightforward. He said that on the afternoon of November 29th, Yurong got off work and came home as usual. But as soon as she walked through the door, another argument erupted between them. This time, like always, it revolved around the same old issues. How to raise the children, who was responsible for what, how to divide the monthly living expenses. He admitted that during the argument, he lost control of his emotions, couldn't restrain himself, and hit his wife several times. After that, Yurong became extremely angry, said nothing more, slammed the door, and left, walking out of the house on her own. At this point, Deputy Squad Leader Lin, as if casually, asked one more question. So how did she leave the house? Did you notice? Did she take the elevator or the stairs? Upon hearing this question, Shin Kai seemed to blank out for a moment, his eyes instinctively darting away, avoiding direct eye contact with the person across from him. After a few seconds of silence, as if thinking, he finally stammered hesitantly, Maybe she took the stairs. I'm not really sure." To an ordinary person unfamiliar with investigations, this answer might seem acceptable. But for experienced criminal investigators like Deputy Squad Leader Lin, people accustomed to examining crime scenes and analyzing human behavior and habits, this answer was problematic. The Wangsan community was a building of more than 10 floors equipped with modern elevators operating 24/7. Residents living here, under normal circumstances, almost always used the elevator to get around. Unless the elevator was broken or the building lost power, rarely would anyone voluntarily carry things and walk down from a high floor, climbing down each step laboriously. Besides, Yurong had just returned home from work that day, after a long, tiring day at her job. However, what concerned the investigators even more than that clumsy answer was Shin Kai's overall attitude throughout the entire period since the incident occurred. His ex-wife had been completely unreachable for several days straight. Her phone couldn't be reached, she couldn't be found anywhere. Yet he hadn't proactively gone to the police station to file a report, nor had he bothered to actively contact her family to check if she might have gone there. It was only after Mrs. Liu rushed frantically to the police station to report her daughter missing, and then the police came knocking at his door, that he began cooperating. And even then, his cooperation was passive and reluctant. Every time he was asked about his wife, he kept repeating the same phrases as if he'd memorized them. "She's probably just out relaxing. She's been under a lot of pressure lately. She probably needed to get out and get some fresh air. She'll probably be back." To accurately determine whether a case is simply a domestic dispute or conceals a serious crime behind it, relying solely on investigative intuition and subjective impressions, is never enough. Therefore, the task force decided to split into two parallel tracks of investigation. One group continued taking turns interrogating Shin Kai, digging deeper into every detail of his statements. The other group of investigators fanned out, approaching neighbors living in the same building, colleagues who had worked with Yurong, and acquaintances of both, gathering information from multiple sources to piece together the full picture of this turbulent marriage. In the eyes of most older family members and relatives, Yurong was the quintessential other people's daughter, the kind of child any parent would dream of having. From an early age, she excelled academically, never needing her parents to worry about or remind her about her studies. Through her own efforts, she tested into National Chengchi University in Taipei, majoring in Japanese. After graduating with honors, she was quickly hired by a foreign company to work as a Japanese translator. After working for some time and accumulating enough experience and connections, she decided to go independent, taking on freelance translation work for more flexibility. Her work was always stable, and she worked with extreme diligence and attention to every small detail. In just a few years, she had purchased her own apartment in the Wangsan community in Beitun district. Not only that, She also saved up to help her parents pay off some of their bank loans, helping them prepare for a comfortable retirement. Her former colleagues, when asked, all gave remarkably consistent assessments. She was quiet, didn't like to show off, but was incredibly meticulous and careful in her work. Shinkai, on the other hand, walked a path completely opposite to Yurong's. He grew up in a volatile and impoverished single-parent household. His father died when he was too young to understand what was happening, and afterward his mother remarried another man, making his life unstable from then on. During his childhood, there was even a period when he was placed in a social care facility, living away from family. By middle school, he had dropped out halfway through, unable to complete even his basic education. From then on, he scrambled to make a living through all sorts of manual labor jobs. He had worked as a clerk at a convenience store, behind the counter at a bubble tea shop, as a server at karaoke clubs, and had also worked in restaurant kitchens washing dishes and doing miscellaneous cleaning work. Jobs kept changing one after another. He couldn't last long anywhere. Some places he quit himself because he found the work too tiring and exhausting. Others he was fired from because employers and co-workers complained about his poor attitude and lack of responsibility. On one occasion, he went too far by dipping into the sales revenue at the store where he worked, resulting in his being caught and taken to the police station. Not long after, he got involved in another fraud case, leaving a criminal record on his file. On the surface, he had a rather scholarly appearance, and his manner of speaking seemed polite and refined. But his true nature was someone who couldn't handle hardship, who procrastinated constantly, and who at the slightest provocation wanted to take shortcuts. That was the common impression of many who had interacted or worked with him. How did two people with such vastly different backgrounds and life trajectories end up together? It was simply an ordinary coincidence. One night after working late, Yurong stopped by a late-night eatery to grab a bite. When it came time to pay, she realized she had forgotten to bring her wallet. Just as she was feeling awkward and unsure what to do, Shinkai, who happened to also be eating there, stepped up to pay for her meal. Afterward, the two exchanged a few polite words and contact information. Then, with several more chance encounters that followed, meetings that Yurong believed were fate, she gradually came to see this relationship as something destined by heaven. During their conversations, Shinkai didn't hide anything, but proactively laid bare his entire difficult, troubled, less than stellar past before her. He told her sincerely, "I know I'm not good enough for you. I have nothing." To someone with little experience in romantic relationships, someone with a sensitive heart who was easily moved to compassion like Yurong, this honesty and humility became a powerful weapon that easily stirred feelings of sympathy and a desire to protect. When Yurong's family learned of this, they were unanimously opposed. Mrs. Liu couldn't believe that the daughter she had painstakingly raised from childhood, who had studied diligently, finally secured a stable career, and bought a home in Taichung, had decided to marry a boyfriend who was a middle school dropout, constantly changed jobs, and even had a criminal record. But Yurong's attitude was resolute. She believed that differences in education and income weren't the point. The point was that he was good to her. Furthermore, she believed she could give him a chance and carry this family on her shoulders. For the first few years after their marriage, things appeared passable on the surface. The home was hers, so not having to pay rent was a major advantage. Shinkai also seemed to settle down for a while, cooking meals, doing laundry, taking their older daughter to the park. Neighbors would sometimes even compliment him. He seems pretty domestic. But after their second child was born, things began to change. Because of pregnancy and childbirth, Yurong temporarily took on less work, and her income decreased. Meanwhile, her husband ran into problems at his factory job and was let go, leaving him to go back to washing dishes. But he became increasingly indifferent to work, spending more and more time at home, with video games and his phone consuming his entire daily routine. Housework and childcare gradually became Yurong's burden alone. By 2019, Shinkai once again ran afoul of the law when he was arrested for involvement in another fraud scheme. For Yurong, a freelance translator who lived by her professional expertise and reputation, having a husband caught up in criminal activity wasn't merely another financial burden. It directly affected the reputation she had painstakingly built over the years and her credibility in the eyes of clients and partners. In the professional translation industry, reputation and trust are everything. Once tarnished, it's extremely difficult to restore. It was precisely that year, after so many years of trying to endure, that Yurong first spoke the words she had probably been thinking about for a long time, but had never dared to say, "Maybe we should get a divorce." But from those words to action was a long road filled with struggle and pain. After she said that, there followed countless arguments, reconciliation attempts that fell apart, promises to change that were broken. It wasn't until November 24th, 2020, after more than a year of prolonged tension and exhaustion, that the words, "Maybe we should get a divorce," finally became reality, transformed into a cold, stark entry in the household registration office's database. On paper, their marriage had officially ended. But despite being divorced, both continued to live crammed together in the same small apartment. 5 days after the divorce papers were signed, on the fateful afternoon of November 29th, the building's surveillance cameras captured Yurong's final image, her silhouette leisurely stepping out of the elevator and walking toward her apartment after a day at work. From that moment on, she completely vanished from all footage, never appearing again on any recording from any camera in the entire residential complex, as if she had evaporated from the face of the earth. For the task force working day and night to uncover the truth, every subsequent step in the investigation now meant following the deep cracks of this broken marriage in search of clues. One big question hung in every investigator's mind. What exactly had happened that night, inside that fifth-floor apartment? Faced with Shinkai's insistence on repeating, word for word, that she was just upset and went out to cool off, that she'd come back on her own, absolutely refusing to reveal any additional information, the task force realized that continuing to interrogate him in the conventional way would lead nowhere. On the afternoon of December 3rd, they decided to return to the Wengson community once more, hoping to discover additional details in the apartment that might have been overlooked during previous searches. That day happened to fall during after-school hours on a regular weekday, and Yurong's older daughter, just 8 years old, was sitting at home diligently doing her homework. Deputy Squad Leader Lin, figuring he might as well try asking, slowly crouched down to the little girl's eye level and gently asked in his most gentle voice, "Sweetie, over the past few days, have you noticed anything different in the house or in the refrigerator? Have you seen anything strange appear or disappear?" What he absolutely didn't expect was that the little girl answered almost instantly, without needing any time to think. She said that on the morning of December 2nd, before her father took both sisters to school as usual, she had seen a large red and black suitcase placed right in front of the master bedroom door. That suitcase was normally kept tucked away in a corner of the house, but that day it had suddenly been pulled out and placed right in the middle of the walkway, blocking the doorway to her parents' room. Curious about why the suitcase was there, she had run over to touch it and tried to push it. She remembered the feeling very clearly. The suitcase was extraordinarily heavy. She couldn't budge it at all. Yet when the two sisters returned home from school that afternoon, the suitcase had vanished. For an 8-year-old's perception, details with such strong contrasts, an extremely heavy suitcase that was sitting right there in the morning but had disappeared without a trace by afternoon, typically leave a much deeper impression than they would on adults, who are often too busy and easily overlook small changes in their surroundings. Upon hearing this, Deputy Squad Leader Lin's entire body suddenly became alert and intensely focused. A mother who had mysteriously vanished without a trace. An abnormally heavy suitcase that suddenly appeared and then disappeared in a single day. The timing of both events matched up suspiciously, both revolving around December 2nd. The gap between morning, when the suitcase was there, and afternoon, when it had vanished. That window of time might very well be the crucial key to the entire case. Immediately, Deputy Squad Leader Lin contacted the residential complex's management office, requesting all surveillance footage from throughout the entire day of December 2nd. He decided to start reviewing from the motorcycle entrance and exit area in the basement. And sure enough, his hunch proved correct. In the footage from around 10:39 a.m., the image appeared clearly. Shin Kai was riding his familiar motorcycle, slowly pulling out of the basement area. The passenger seat was completely empty, carrying nothing noteworthy. However, just over 10 minutes later, that same motorcycle reappeared in the camera's view as Shin Kai returned to the apartment complex. But this time, there was a distinct difference. Behind the motorcycle was now a brand new handcart with a black painted steel frame and a blue platform. The cart was tied securely to the passenger seat with rope, the camera capturing every detail clearly. The investigators continued extending the timeline forward, expanding their footage retrieval from the residential complex's internal cameras to the traffic surveillance cameras on the streets outside, patiently tracking the motorcycle's path. Before long, Shin Kai appeared on camera for the third time. This time, the handcart was still attached behind him, but now on the cart sat an eye-catching large red suitcase. The entire setup, motorcycle pulling a handcart carrying a bright red suitcase, was being transported toward the Dakang Mountain area on the outskirts of Taichung City. Now, with the innocent but crucially important testimony from the 8-year-old as the starting point, combined with the unbroken chain of surveillance footage linking together like the links of a chain, the suitcase was officially listed as key evidence in the case. What exactly did that suitcase contain, and where had it been dumped? Very quickly afterward, Shin Kai was once again summoned to the police station for questioning. Initially, he maintained the same attitude as before, evading whatever he could. When asked about the suitcase, he shrugged and dismissively said there were lots of suitcases in the house, nothing special about any of them. When asked about his whereabouts and activities over the past few days, he hemmed and hawed, saying he couldn't remember clearly, the days had all blurred together, and he wasn't sure what he'd done when. It wasn't until they posed a direct question, "Did you go out and buy a handcart?" that Shin Kai was forced to change his denial, reluctantly nodding and admitting that yes, he had gone to a supermarket to buy a handcart. He explained he'd bought it to make moving things around the house more convenient. Then, as if to prove his words were true, he even rummaged through his pants pocket and produced a receipt. The time printed on the receipt, the store location, everything matched perfectly with what the surveillance footage had captured. Confronted by increasingly aggressive questioning, and the evidence being presented step by step, Shin Kai finally had to rack his brain for an explanation for all his actions. He claimed that at home there was a pile of old clothes that hadn't been worn in ages, just sitting there taking up space and gathering dust, and he was too lazy to bother carrying them out bag by bag. So he came up with the idea of pulling out the large suitcase from the house, stuffing all the old clothes inside, then strapping the suitcase onto the newly purchased handcart, using his motorcycle to haul everything to the area near Dakang Mountain. There, he dumped both the clothes and the suitcase into a dry creek bed. As for the handcart, he added that on his way back, he casually gave it to a homeless person walking along the roadside who seemed like they could use it. At first glance, this explanation might seem somewhat acceptable. But upon calmly sitting down and examining each detail carefully, the story was full of absurdities and contradictions. A man who complained daily about having no money, who penny-pinched every small expense in life, had suddenly gone to the trouble of riding his motorcycle all the way to a supermarket to spend a not insignificant sum of money on a brand new handcart. Then he had laboriously hauled out a large suitcase from the house, packed it so full that an 8-year-old couldn't even budge it, carefully strapped it to the cart with rope, and then gone through the effort of transporting everything by motorcycle on a long trip to a remote mountainous area with few passers-by, all just to throw away a pile of old clothes? From his actual tight financial circumstances to his daily habits that neighbors and acquaintances all knew well, this explanation, from any angle, bore all the hallmarks of a story hastily concocted after the fact. Nevertheless, no matter how suspicious, proper investigative procedures had to be followed. No steps could be skipped. The police decided to follow the exact route Shin Kai had described, having him personally lead them to the supposed dumping site he had identified. That day, the task force convoy quietly made its way along the road Shin Kai directed them down, finally stopping at a section of creek bed within the Dakang Mountain area. Observing the scene, it matched what he had described earlier. Because it was the dry season, there wasn't much water in the creek, and most of the creek bed was exposed, revealing patches of pebbles and cracked, dried mud. Visibility in the area wasn't bad, fairly open and easy to survey. By normal logic, if there really was a large, bright red suitcase lying somewhere in this creek bed, even if it were partially covered with mud or wedged between rocks, one sweep with a flashlight should have revealed it immediately. There was no way to miss it. Yet the actual results were the complete opposite of expectations. The investigators patiently walked the entire length of the creek bed, from upstream all the way down to downstream, carefully scanning every nook and cranny, thoroughly checking every spot visible to the naked eye. But the result was zero. Absolutely no sign of any suitcase whatsoever. Standing in the middle of the dry creek with cracked earth beneath their feet, every member of the task force understood clearly that Shinkai had guided them very earnestly, his cooperative attitude appearing quite sincere, but the location he had brought them to was certainly not where the suitcase had actually been dumped. He was lying, deliberately trying to throw the investigation off track. With the clues already in hand, the handcart, the eye-catching red suitcase, and the entire route captured on camera clearly heading toward Dakhang Mountain, the task force quickly narrowed their search area, focusing all resources on the Dakhang Mountain region. Completely unlike the densely populated urban areas with their tight surveillance coverage, this mountainous zone was essentially a blind spot for traffic cameras, with virtually no street surveillance devices installed whatsoever. At night, the area was swallowed by thick darkness, only occasionally pierced by the headlights of a few stray cars passing through before quickly disappearing. That very night, multiple teams of officers were urgently deployed, each person equipped with a handheld flashlight, splitting into small groups to enter the mountain area simultaneously from different directions. They patiently combed along the edges of winding mountain paths, checking each drainage ditch running alongside the roads, not skipping over any dense brush or overgrown thickets, searching inch by inch with utmost precision. The working conditions were extremely harsh. The air was stifling and humid, practically sticking to the skin, leaving everyone drenched in sweat. Weeds on both sides of the road grew taller than a person, blocking visibility and impeding every step. Time passed slowly in the darkness, and just as most members of the search team were beginning to lose hope, the unexpected happened. One team member, sweeping their flashlight beam along a roadside drainage ditch, suddenly spotted a familiar object, a handcart lying abandoned right next to the ditch's opening. Instinctively, they swept the light over to the dense brush immediately adjacent, and in that moment, a patch of bright red caught their eye, peeking out from between the tall wild grass. The large red suitcase, the crucial evidence the entire task force had been urgently searching for, was sitting there silently amid the wild grass, as if waiting to be found. The cart lay in the drainage ditch. The suitcase sat in the brush right beside it. The two items were very close together, perfectly matching what the surveillance footage had shown earlier. A motorcycle carrying a cart and suitcase going up the mountain, but returning with just the motorcycle alone, the cart and suitcase having been left behind somewhere up here. The red suitcase was carefully collected and transported to the criminal forensics unit for examination, according to proper legal procedures. The layer of mud clinging to the exterior, the dried grass leaves stuck to the surface, the pull handle, the wheels, every part of the suitcase was carefully sampled and photographed by the experts before any further steps were taken. Then, in an atmosphere of tension and heaviness permeating the examination room, the suitcase was slowly opened. Inside, multiple layers of black plastic tape appeared, wrapped one layer upon another, sealed tight and suffocatingly constricting. The tape had been wound very carefully, very tightly, as if the person who did it wanted to ensure nothing could escape from inside. The forensic experts and examination staff, following strict professional protocols, carefully removed each layer of tape step by step. And what emerged from within confirmed the worst fears. It was the body of a woman. From the victim's physical characteristics, to the clothing she was wearing, to the official identification when family members were brought to the scene to confirm, every single element pointed to one undeniable conclusion. The person inside that fateful red suitcase was none other than Yurong, the woman who had been mysteriously missing for so many days. When the forensic experts conducted the autopsy, they discovered clear signs of struggle and resistance on Yurong's body. In particular, both of her arms were covered with wounds characteristic of defensive injuries, cuts and bruises indicating she had used her hands to block, to shield, to try to protect herself. Additionally, parts of her body showed signs of chemical corrosion. Furthermore, after cross-referencing the plastic tape inside the suitcase, the gaps in the suitcase body, and the handle of the handcart, consistent reactions were found matching the apartment, as well as traces of Shinkai's contact. Combined with the surveillance footage of him alone purchasing the cart and rope, the chain of evidence in the police's hands now stretched clearly from the Wengsin community all the way to that small patch of brush beside the mountain road in Dakheng. As piece after piece of evidence piled up on the table, Shinkai's reaction throughout remained the same two words: denial. Asked about the suitcase, he said he was just throwing away old clothes. Asked about the cart, he said he casually gave it away to someone. Even when shown photos of the red suitcase in the brush, he stubbornly insisted, "I don't know who that is." The task force understood clearly that at this point, continuing to confront him aggressively would serve little purpose. So they changed their approach, no longer going back and forth over evidence, instead shifting focus toward family and the two daughters at home. The investigator slowly brought up the scene from that day when they'd questioned the older daughter and asked him, "You always say you love your children very much, but one day they'll grow up. They'll search things out for themselves. They'll see everything that happened today. At that point, they'll discover how their mother disappeared, what really happened. And when that time comes, how will you face them?" That night, the atmosphere in the interrogation room was unbearably heavy. Finally, he let out a sigh and said just one sentence: "All right, I'll talk." According to Shinkai's subsequent confession, the incident occurred on the afternoon of November 29th, 2020. That day, Yurong got off work and came home, entering the basement garage as usual and taking the elevator upstairs. Once inside, the two quickly got into a conflict over post-divorce arrangements, who the house belonged to, when he would move out, who would primarily care for the children, how visitation would work afterward. Yurong's attitude was more resolute than before. She demanded that he move out of the apartment registered under her name within the agreed time frame, and that he could visit the children at fixed scheduled times going forward. She would not allow him to continue living there as before without actually shouldering any responsibility. For a man who had long depended on her for his livelihood and who had high self-esteem, these words were like a declaration that he was being kicked out of his home. Shinkai described feeling at that moment like he had been backed into a corner, and his emotions instantly spiraled out of control. What started as an argument quickly escalated into physical pushing and struggling. The details of what happened at the scene he recounted only in fragments, but the evidence in the home and the forensic report helped fill in many of the gaps. The conflict moved from the entryway deeper into the apartment. The noise caused the downstairs neighbor to call the police, but everything suddenly went quiet before the police arrived. What happened next? Exactly which moment crossed which line? Perhaps even he couldn't say clearly. The argument ultimately transformed into an act of violence that could never be undone. Yurong collapsed and never had the chance to walk out that door again. After the panic set in, he didn't call the police, didn't call an ambulance, but instead tried to clean up the evidence, tried to stuff the body into a suitcase, tried to use a handcart and a mountain road to push the whole incident as far away as possible. After the case entered the judicial process, the judge determined that although the conflict between Shinkai and Yurong originated from divorce and child custody disputes, during the course of the argument, he had used a knife to stab his ex-wife multiple times in vital areas. Afterward, he had used concentrated sulfuric acid to destroy the body, then used a suitcase to transport and dump it in a remote mountainous area. The methods were cruel, clearly exceeding what could be attributed to injury caused by loss of emotional control, sufficient to be determined as intentional homicide. More importantly, From the time the crime occurred until his arrest, he had continuously lied to both family and police, claiming she had simply left home in a huff, refusing for so long to tell the truth. Even when police had found the suitcase and shown him photos of the body, he still pretended not to recognize anything. He showed absolutely no remorse. The court ultimately combining charges of murder, abandonment of a corpse, and other crimes, sentenced Shina Kai to life imprisonment with loss of civil rights. The entire case, after appeal, maintained the original verdict. And that is the case for today. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next video.